I'm Allison Jones. I basically worked at Wild Utah Project forever, and I continue to keep in touch with my people here with what was once the Grazing Reform Network, now the Healthy Public Lands Project, helping out how I can. So Naomi and Bob explained why science can and should be used in land management and wildlife management decisions. Dave helped us understand why it's often not. And I'm here to tell the Duck Creek allotment story because there's a lot of agencies that have, decent regulations out there that seem to say that science should be playing a role in making decisions. And this story will talk about whether we can test that in the courtroom. Does the science hold up in the courtroom? So in interest of time, I'm going to blow through this slide. But basically, we, being Wild Utah Project and Western Watersheds Project, decided to make the Duck Creek allotment in northern Utah kind of a proof of concept case study to try to get the BLM basically into court and go after them after their subjective monitoring. And we thought this was going to be the place to do it. In 2007, the BLM issued an environmental assessment that was proposing to divide up the Duck Creek allotment into 4 pastures to do a rest rotation or deferred rotation system, bring in new pipelines and water troughs. The idea being they admitted that there was a problem in Duck Creek, and they thought they can solve it by keeping cows in the riparian area for 1 month instead of 4, by cycling them through, doing a whole season of rest in each of the 4 pastures once every 4 years. And so we decided to do some very in-depth monitoring starting in 2005 to collect the baseline data to show the BLM and the world whether this 4 pasture scheme would actually work on the ground to improve anything. And in 2005, according to the BLM, the conditions were pretty good in Duck Creek. Again, ironically, even though on paper they're agreeing that the allotment's degraded and needing a fix like this 4 pasture system. This slide here shows the results of the Upland Rangeland Health Assessment. This is called Interpreting Indicators of Rangeland Health. And how the BLM interpreted these indicators was that they were not departed from reference conditions. This is not measuring anything quantitatively. This is mostly qualitative. And they're not comparing it to a grazed exclosure. There were none anywhere up there. But they're comparing it to the ecological site description of what should be there and saying that these 17 indicators of rangeland health, ranging from indicators of erosion to functional structural plant groups, are at the worst slightly to moderately departed from reference conditions. And the story continues in 2005. No problem here. Lots of canopy cover. We're meeting rangeland health standards on Duck Creek. How they got the production of 1,962 pounds per acre, I'd love to know. I can tell you they were not on their hands and knees clipping forage and drying it and weighing it to get that number. So we decided to actually use one of the BLM's own methods, the pair plot method, to know definitively what was happening with both forage production on Duck Creek and utilization. And so in this method, you're clipping all the grasses and forbs in these 4 foot by 4 foot frames. In the upland area, they're laid along transects, kind of in a star around the central utilization cage, which is protected from grazing. The idea is that you can know exactly how much forage is utilized by comparing what's left in the cage at the end of the year that isn't touched and subtracting that from what's left in the frames, which is very little. And so we can know by the difference how much forage has been removed. This will give you an exact utilization rate. And then you can average across all of the utilization cages how much forage is there and extrapolate that to the allotment and get an actual pounds per acre of edible forage. And we do the same thing in the riparian areas, just putting those clipping frames up and downstream of the utilization cage. That's probably Jim Catlin. We spent thousands of hours clipping hundreds and hundreds of frames for every grass and forb for 10 years. And so what did we find? It's important to compare your results, again, to the ecological site description for the allotment. The ESD for Duck Creek says there should be 75% composition of grass, 10% forbs, 15% shrubs. I can tell you this is basically reversed in Duck Creek with shrubs versus herbaceous. In a wet year, you should see about 1,500 pounds of forage. In 2005 was a wet year, and we found about a quarter of that, closer to 350 pounds of forage. This slide Jim made is actually mislabeled. This is 2009, after they implemented the 4-pasture rest rotation system. And basically, our numbers that we found with the pair plot method are in black, and the BLM's numbers are in red. Again, the BLM uses a method for utilization called ocular utilization method, and yes, it is what it sounds like. It is eyeballing. So that year, the BLM found about 12% utilization in the 2 northern pastures. And we found 30% utilization in the northwest pasture and 22% utilization in the northeast pasture using the paired plot method. Obviously, we found that there was cattle trespass in that year and that the fences weren't working so well. In the southern pastures, BLM found 18% utilization in the southwest. We found 76%, and BLM found 33% utilization in the southeast pasture. We found 68%. And it's even worse in the riparian areas. Basically, as you can see, cattle are eating every single thing that's not in the cage. And we didn't really have BLM utilization data to compare this to, because they mostly like to measure stubble height of Nebraska sedge, which conveniently cattle don't really care about grazing. Okay, so as I mentioned, we appealed that environmental assessment in 2008, and in 2009, we began what ended up being the longest grazing case in the history of the Interior Bureau of Land Appeals, with doctors Jim Catlin and John Carter spending hundreds of hours on the witness stand presenting these mountains of data that we had versus not very much by the BLM. And this resulted in a great decision for us. Judge Heffernan, the administrative law judge, basically threw the book at the BLM. And he even said, we're going to rewrite the Taylor Grazing Act with this case. He was firmly on our side. He faulted them for their subjective methods, including the ocular utilization method, the key species method, where they just get to decide which species they measure. He faulted them for not adequately looking at the impacts that the new range plumbing and troughs were going to have on the allotment. Unfortunately, our pleasure of this decision was short-lived. And this decision was so important because we were counting on it to be able to apply to other grazing allotments in the West, where the BLM similarly is not taking a hard look at the real situation on the ground, using objective tools to do so, and not painting a true picture of conditions. Unfortunately, the BLM immediately appealed the good decision in 2013 by the administrative law judge. And yes, it did take 4 years to get that first decision. And the 3-judge panel in the Interior Bureau of Land Appeals spent a long time in the weeds, wondering if a PhD in ecology was good enough to be qualified as an expert in rangeland management, and just other silly things not worth going into. And basically their decision, which took another 4 years, and this was frustrating because we never got to present our data in front of the panel. It was all based on that 15,000-page hearing transcript from 2013. But when they finally handed down that decision in 2017, the bottom line is what's in bold, that in 2013, the administrative law judge gave no deference to BLM's experts, the data they compiled, and the decision made based on their data, as the law requires. So this was a true blow to us as the plaintiffs, but I think the entire conservation community working on grazing. We were counting on Duck Creek to be the next, comb wash case and more powerful to be able to apply to other allotments. But yeah, science didn't matter. All that matters is deference to the agency expert, whoever that is, by whatever means they're using to make that decision, data or no data. So we immediately appealed this decision out of the IBLA and to federal district court, and I'll finish on that at the end as to where that is. And I'm pretty much almost out of time, so I'm gonna blow through these slides here, but even though we couldn't present any more data in the Duck Creek case, after 2009 when it started, we continued to collect data for another 4 years, because in 2009 is when they began implementing the 4-pasture rotation system. And those additional 4 years of data collection showed that by moving the same amount of cattle through 4 pastures did not help improve stubble height in the riparian area. If anything, it got worse. Rotating the same number of cattle through those 4 pastures did not improve the amount of both of the upland grazed residuals after grazing. If anything, again, worse. The scheme that was implemented in 2009 did not improve either upland or riparian utilization rates on Duck Creek. And we ran statistics on all those things, and we published the Duck Creek story scientifically in Rangelands, which is one of the premier journals of the Society for Rangeland Management. This paper came out in 2017, the same year as the bad decision by the 3-panel IBLA judges. But this did create quite a stir, especially with scientists who are apologists for the agency. So basically, the Duck Creek case still swirls in appeal hyperspace in federal district court. It took another 4 years. I don't know what it is about this 4-year thing for our attorneys to be able to argue our case before the judge last fall. And we now eagerly await the needed decision of that federal judge to remand the bad decision from 2017, replace it with the original good decision from the administrative law judge in 2013, so we can finally begin to apply this most important case on BLM lands everywhere. So that's my talk.